Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today. Today's training is market research. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping notes. There will be a survey conducted at the end once you exit out of this training. So if you could please complete the survey once this training concludes. I have opened up the Q&A and the chat box. The chat box, you can be able to communicate with each other. If someone wants to go ahead and try to test it out, so you can be able to send responses to everyone else. I see there was a question that said, I cannot hear you, but we're just now getting started, John. So if you still cannot hear me, Curtis, if you could please just type a message in there that if John still cannot hear us, can he please exit and then re-enter? Okay, good. I see everyone said that it's working. And so if you have any questions during this training, please put them in the chat box. Put them in the Q&A box. And what we will do throughout this presentation, our host will, stop for a little bit and be able to respond to some of them. So before we get started, I want to introduce our speaker today. Ms. Elizabeth Harrington is the Deputy Director of Acquisition Support Team, and she began working for VA in March 2019. Prior to her appointment at VA Osbs, Ms. Harrington began working with the federal government as a corporate intern at the Defense Logistics Agency, Aviation in Richmond, Virginia. Upon completing the corporate intern program, Ms. Harrington served as a contracting officer at DLA Aviation. In the interest of broadening her contracting knowledge, she transitioned to Defense Logistics Agency, Energy, which is located in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, where she worked as an energy services buyer and contract specialist. In this position, she applied her knowledge and skills in the acquisition of fuel-related services procurement. In 2014, Ms. Harrington joined the Washington Headquarters Services Acquisition Directorate, where she worked as a contract specialist in the Enterprise Office of the Secretary of Defense, where she gained experience in procuring knowledge-based services. In December of 2014, she joined the Washington Headquarters Services Office of Small Business Programs as a small business professional. Her duties and responsibilities include providing guidance and support on small business matters to members of WHS Acquisition Directorate and to program offices that rely on WHS AD for acquisition support. While with WHS OSBP, she did a rotation with DoD Headquarters Office of Small Business Programs for 6 months, where she expanded her small business knowledge working on policy and legislation oversight, subcontracting, mentor-protege program, and workforce development. Ms. Harrington has 13 years of federal government experience and holds a Level 3 DAWIA certification in contracting. Also, FAC Core Level 3 and FAC PM Level 2 certifications. She obtained her master's in business administration from the University of Maryland University College, woo woo, in Maryland of 2018, and recently graduated from the VA Senior Acquisition Leadership Training Program, which is also known as SALT. So without further ado, Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all today. I have conducted this training many times, so this topic never gets old for me because I am a firm believer in giving the best information possible so you as a small business owner can be as successful as you need to be. As Wendy stated, I'm Liz Harrington. So let's go ahead and talk about market research, a topic that's always near and dear to my heart. And so the objectives that we will talk about today is understand the marketplace and the basic questions that are aligned with market research. I'm going to tell you a little bit about market research more in depth and how the VA does it. I'm also going to discuss the many different market research mechanisms that are out here that the government uses to actually do and conduct market research. I'm also going to go into very great detail about how you play a critical role as a small business owner and why it's important for you to respond to market research. And then I'm going to talk about a practical example of how market research will determine set-asides. This is an actual real life scenario that I personally worked on that I felt that was very important enough to share with the small business community. And then we'll go over any questions, as Wendy said, in between time, as I'll make sure I take a pause so we're all tracking and I can answer the questions in real time. So we'll talk about some basic questions. So most of the time I can understand how many small businesses don't like it when they attend a networking or an outreach event. And when you speak to a procurement person, they ask you the question, oh, are you doing your homework? I understand that a lot of you don't like that question, but there's a very important reason why we ask that question. First, you need to make sure that the federal agencies that you are targeting make sense to your capability. So if you're not having success, what changes should you consider making? So here's a case in point. As Wendy was reading my background, when I worked for Washington Headquartered Services, that entity, what we do is we work on anything within the Pentagon. So it could be construction, it could be like, someone fixing stairs at the Pentagon, it could be anything that's happening in terms of any of the program offices within the Pentagon, they need contracting services. So I would attend a networking event, and one of the biggest things that I would have was someone came and said, hey, I do window treatments. I'm like, oh, okay, you do window treatments. But at the Pentagon, we don't do window treatments. So the moral of that story is to say, when you are going to these networking events and you're talking to people at federal agencies, the question is, are you aligning your capabilities to what is going on out in the field? I see the question saying, I'm not on mute. So if you can check if you're using a headset, just make sure that your speaker is connected to the actual headset or whatever mechanism that you're using. So I just want to make sure everyone can hear. So is the consensus, Wendy, that a lot of people actually can hear what I'm saying?
Yes, they can hear. We have, I think,
Okay.
maybe one or two people that are experiencing some
Okay.
technical
I just want
issues with
to,
audio.
all right, perfect. Thank you. I just want to make sure. So that's why they always ask, hey, what's going on in terms of why do I need to do my homework? So always make sure that whoever you're targeting, that they procure or buy what it is that you are selling. And if you're not going to do that homework, you're just going to pretty much just be out here aimlessly trying to figure out how to get a federal contract. And that's not the best way to do it. So then the next question that I tend to ask a lot of small businesses is, are you familiar with the FAR and other regulations? So you would be very surprised to see how many people really don't read their contracts. So many businesses do make the mistake of not getting a lawyer or hiring someone to help them understand the terms and conditions of their contract. At a minimum, if you want to get into or do any kind of federal contracting, at least learn the basics of the contract types and what the terms and conditions of your contract reads. Because the one thing I really don't want is the government terminating your contract for default or terminating it for convenience because there's just a disconnect with the terms and conditions of the contract and how you are performing on the contract. The third question we have you sought after free government resources with the SBA, your local PTAC, or small business development centers? So the question is, the reason why you have to seek those people is when you come to an OSDBU office at any federal agency, at that point, the expectation is that you have already gotten your feet wet and you have already done the due diligence to do the basic homework in terms of what it is that you need to do. So the PTAC and the SBA Small Business Development Centers, these are your people who actually give you the hand holding that you need to help you be successful, especially your PTAC. They help you understand SAM.gov. They help you understand in further detail how to align your capability statement. Because the thing is, you want to do as much grunt work as you can so you can be very proficient and smart before you go to an OSDBU office. Because the point of by the time you come to an OSDBU office, you should have already known the basics. At this time, when you come to an OSDBU office, the most we can do is really trying to help you connect with actual procurement opportunities and not so much having to hold your hand with how to do business with the VA or whatever federal agency it is. So can you answer these questions? So the questions are, whenever there is a market research inquiry that comes out there, during the market research phase are the fundamental needs, and it's your opportunity for you to show that you have done the work and understand the problems of the agency and that you can solve the problems. So it goes in line with, can you solve problems? And when a market research inquiry comes out, can you answer the questions? It's not enough anymore just to say, yes, I can do this, but not explain how you can do it. The key point is always answering the how. And lastly, can you draft a proposal? Many people do overlook the proposal writing process. And the key is the market research phase is the start of you answering any questions. So I'm not saying it's a proposal, right? So any kind of like source of thought or request for information, look at it as an opportunity to get better for the proposal for when the solicitation comes out. Because the better you are to answer the questions during the source of thought or the RFI phase, which is a request for information, the better you will be with actually when it comes to a request for quote or request for proposal. So make sure your proposals always align with what is being asked for in the solicitation. I have seen many instances where proposal writers just write, but they never align to the capability of the company and the tasks that are listed in the PWS. So don't take this slide for granted. So when these questions are being asked, or even ask yourself these questions before you submit a source of thought response or an RFI response or even a solicitation. What does my proposal say? Am I actually solving the problems? And am I actually aligning everything to the task areas listed in the proposal? So next, we're going to talk about market research and how the VA does it. So here I have listed that the VA is governed by Vets First and the Kingdomware decision. Yes, we are veteran-centric, but we're not vets only. So when you look at FAR Part 10, so FAR Part 10 is what states that the contracting officer is responsible for conducting market research. But initially and essentially, the program manager, who is a subject matter expert on the requirement, has to provide the contracting officer with preliminary market research of the marketplace so they can make an informed decision. So at the VA, we always start here. And then we always start with a VIP search to see how many service disabled veterans or veteran small businesses are verified. First, that's where we start, and then we conduct additional market research to determine capability, fair market price, quality, and delivery as it's stated in the FAR. So I'm going to go into more. We had a seminar earlier that talked about the rule of two. So if you can go back to listen to that seminar, if you weren't privy to it, or if you didn't listen to it, it's a very good one because it helps you understand the rule of two determination. Because what happens is if people don't see a specific set aside, and then you know that you can do the capability, but you didn't respond to market research inquiries, it does hinder the set aside determinations. So just remember that we do have to do any kind of additional market research after we do the preliminary research in a VIP to identify how many are verified. Just because you're verified doesn't mean you're capable, or just because you have certain NAICS codes, we still have to do our due diligence on our side to make sure that you can actually provide the product or service at a fair market price and that you can meet delivery standards. So it's not just two or more, it has to meet those other conditions. So I just really want to stress that. And then the VA, we take it a step further. So after the program manager does this preliminary market research, if a requirement is over $7 million and it fits the criteria for an integrated product team, which is what we call an IPT, the program manager then has to request an IPT. So the IPT is internal and it's made out of the contracting officer, the contract specialist, the core, the program manager, and then OSDBU and other key procurement members of the team, such as legal. So this is where we all review the preliminary market research that the program manager has conducted, and then we look at it. From an OSDBU side, we also have the small business liaison involved as well. And then what we do is we make sure that when we see the preliminary market research that the program manager has done, we can make the suggestion like, hey, you have to do more market research. And so this is where we have the most pull, is if we have these IPTs that we can come in and say, hey, we did our preliminary VIP search, we did what other market research assessments that we probably could have done, and we've determined, yes, you do have 2 or more service disabled vets that could potentially do this work. We go as far as using our internal databases to identify other small businesses and other federal agencies that are doing similar work. So the goal is to make sure that people are not stovepiping a lot of these requirements or steering them to specific companies, but to make sure that we actually have a broader range of viable companies that potentially could do the work. So then the next part is the program manager creates the market research brief. So once we come together and finish the market research brief, that's when the contracting officer will validate the market research. So it's usually a written report. They make sure that everything is correct, all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. And then after the market research has been validated, that's when the acquisition strategy determination is done. And then they finalize the acquisition plan, and then the solicitation is posted. So before the solicitation is posted, if it requires a small business coordination record, then it comes to OSDBU, and then we will sign off on it to say that the CEO can post the solicitation. I know this was a mouthful, but I just wanted to give you a snippet of how the process actually works and how we do it. So in this slide, we talk about the socioeconomic hierarchy here at the VA. Although FAR 19.203 outlines that there's no order of precedence, but the VA is governed by CFR and the Vets First Contracting Program. So this is how contracting officers need to evaluate any set-asides. And again, I'm going to keep foot stomping. Set-asides are only contingent on the market research results and the status of where the organization is in relation to their small business goals. So that's one of the things that FAR outlines, is that you have to take into consideration where the agency is with the goals. So for instance, what we like to do with the VA is we like to find service disabled veterans who also are 8A, hub zone, and women owned, or just small business, period. So because of the Vets First Contracting, what the SBA does allow us to do is, like we said, like double dip, and we get credit. So if we're behind in certain avenues or in certain socioeconomic categories, the CO can use different mechanisms such as the SBA's underutilized list. We can work with our small business partners at the Small Business Administration to identify 8A firms, the hub zone firms, the women-owned small business firms that are also 8A. Also service disabled veterans. My apologies. And another thing too is we also use the socioeconomic hierarchy to also do our subcontracting. So say if we can't find any service disabled veterans in whatever requirement it might be, that is not service disabled vet or veteran owned small business, but they're 8A, we could also use that status for subcontracting opportunities. So we could still do a set aside for a total small business or a large business set aside, which is unrestricted at this point. But then we also use the market research results to say, hey, we got like 50 hub zone firms that came in that said that they could do the work. And after we reviewed their capability, we determined that, yes, we can beef up the specific subcontracting goal. And therefore, the business who wins the contract has to adhere to the subcontracting plans, and we also get credit toward the socioeconomic hierarchies and the categories as well. So if it's a small business set aside, this is how it starts. We have to start with the SDVOSB, then we work to VOSB, then it goes to 8A and hub zone, which is tier 3, and tier 4 is women owned and the small businesses, other small businesses. And then the last one is full and open unrestricted acquisition. So now we'll talk about the many different market research mechanisms that we have. So according to the FAR, there is an order of precedent. Actually, let me just stop there. Wendy, do we have any questions regarding anything that I've talked about so far? Because I want to go ahead and make sure I answer those before I move on to the mechanisms, because that's a mouthful.
Yes, we have a few questions. One person said, when RFPs ask for how we'll do the work, Does that mean our specific IP approach or the steps we'll take, such as create an assessment, send the assessment to the client, in other words, the how can be at different levels?
So my suggestion is whenever you're in the market research, don't give all your secrets away. I say give just enough to be considered and possibly have the program manager or the contracting officer call you for clarity. I say save all the specifics for the proposal phase because at that point, any kind of proprietary information that you have is protected during the solicitation phase. But then during the market research phase, it's a run for all. So I say just do just and give just enough information that people will become intrigued in what you have to offer. So just never give completely all your secrets away, but just give enough to say, hey, I do have, you know, this innovative idea, and I'm more than happy to discuss it in more detail. And you're free to ask me questions. So just keep the lines of communication open that the program manager or the contracting officer could reach back out to you. I hope I answered your question.
Another question is, if the information you stated is true, only 45% of contracts show up on SAM.gov. Where are the other contracts showing up?
That's a good question because technically SAM.gov is the point of entry for all government contracts. So the only things that do not show up on SAM.gov are the credit card purchases. And those are allowed for up to, I want to say it's over $10,000 now. It's up to $25,000. So anything that's over $25,000 has to be posted on SAM.gov. So I can't speak for the disparity. Or if it's showing up on SAM.gov, the other percentage could be showing up directly as a request for quote on GSA as well. So you have 2 points of entry that you could either see SAM.gov or the GSA eBuy.
How long does it typically take to go from market research to solicitation?
It depends on the requirement. So there's no set time frame. All I know is that according to the FAR, market research is only valid for 18 months. So once a program manager or a contracting officer does like an official market research inquiry, they have 18 months for that market research to be valid before they actually issue a solicitation. But depending on the requirement, it can vary from 30 days to 60 days to 90 days, depending on what the requirement is. But the rule of thumb is market research is only valid for 18 months. So all I know is that an award needs to be made within 18 months after they do the market research, or if not, they have to go back out and issue some updated market research.
What is the best way to be included on the mailing list so that we can receive market research that BA is conducting?
So there's no, I know for a fact that SOC has Gov Delivery. We do let our small service disabled veteran know of requirements that are coming out on the street via Gov Delivery. But a lot of market research inquiries, again, are either in SAM.gov as either a pre-solicitation notice or a sources sought notice or an RFI, or they could do them also on GSA eBuy as well. So that's where they are. But we don't do any other specific notices because it's very clear in the FAR that a lot of market research inquiries do have to go through SAM.gov.
Is there a sourcing strategy vehicle for facilities management, specifically fire safety, fire alarm, or engineering services?
I can't answer that question right now because it's very specific in nature. So we would have to do some digging for that.
Can you please define GWACs?
A government-wide acquisition contract.
Okay.
I see one that says, I thought SAM was 20 grand and above. It is. It's in 25,000 or above. That's when things have to be posted on SAM.gov.
Okay. I'll go ahead and I won't hold you up. Some of these questions I can actually respond to, Liz.
Okay. All right. So let's get to the market research mechanisms. So the first order of precedence is to consider mandatory sources of supply, government-wide acquisition contracts, existing strategic sourcing vehicles. So in the VA, we have Vector, which is a pool of professional services. And then we have T4G, which is our IT requirement. So this is how it starts. That here in the VA, we must consider our internal VA strategic sourcing contracts because now we have the whole category management initiative. So this also controls the spend under management. The point of it is to limit the number of open market contracts that we put out there. So Vector and T4G, especially Vector, is a completely service-disabled veteran-owned and veteran-owned small business set-aside contract. Then we have to work on FAR Part 8002, which is priorities for use of mandatory government supply sources. So this is, you're talking about your Unicore. So I'm going to mix in FAR 8.002, 3, and 4. So this is your Unicore. This is your Ability 1. There are certain things that we have to buy off of those entities. And then if we can't buy off of those entities, then we can find other ways to use those mandatory sources of supply. If nothing that we have falls under those priorities, then we have to issue this sources sought or request for information to see what else is out there. So when we do the sources sought and the RFI, those are the two more popular ones, but there's a big difference. So a sources sought notice is for requirements that already have some sort of acquisition history. And what the customer is doing is they're looking for new sources that have the capability to do the work. A request for information is for either new requirements with no acquisition history, or they're seeking information on potentially new requirements. So these are the things I like to say are your like high tech or innovation kind of type requirements. So if a program manager is figuring, I think I have a requirement, but I don't know if it's a real requirement, let me just get the information from industry to see if I'm even on the right track. So another thing that we like to tell contracting officers and program managers to do is initiate a pre-solicitation conference. So this is where you can do any kind of site visits, and these are usually done for requirements that are very complex in nature. Site visits are really popular with construction type requirements, and so this is your opportunity as industry to coordinate with the government to help structure some of the requirements. I like to say it best. Sometimes in the government side, we don't know what we need until we get there. Or sometimes in our minds, we think our program manager might think this is a requirement that they want or they need, and they really don't know. So this is the time where we really should rely on industry to give us feedback. And from that feedback, it will either help draft a requirement, and then you'll have a better PWS or a statement of work or a statement of objectives. Because I always tell everybody, especially any contracting officer and any program manager, your requirement, if it's not well written or well defined, and you have not used any market research or engaged with industry, I don't care what business size standard a company is, whether it's large, small, medium-sized business, they will not be able to perform on that contract unless your market research and your engagement with industry helps you understand if not you have a true requirement. So if we're going on to more market research mechanisms on the next slide, Wendy, we're also talking about on the VA side, we also do VIP searches. As I stated before, this is only used to find verified service-disabled veteran-owned and veteran-owned small business firms. So we tell our contracting officers all the time, this is not market research just because you're going to VIP. It's good to see how many number of firms you do have that are verified, and they do have to check VIP during the market research phase, at the time of solicitation, and at the time of award. Just because, like I told you earlier, just because you might have a NAICS code, it does not mean that you're actually doing work in that NAICS code. So it always has to be followed up with some form of market research, because we have to determine capability, fair market price, and all those other conditions that are listed in FAR Part 19. Then we have industry days. And keep an eye out for our DAP events. So our DAP events work differently as NVSB as other industry days. These are for requirements that are VA specific and that are intended to increase the SDVOSB or VOSB probability for those contractors to get some work. We do not guarantee you will get a contract, but it does open up more doors of opportunity for networking and getting to know the VA program offices and for you to align your capabilities accordingly. Another good thing that another good search that we do use is FPDS&G. This is more beneficial for you on the contractor side. You have to do your research in FPDS&G to see how many contracts are existing in your NAICS code or your capability. If you see a contract that's only there for 2 to 3 years, it means that it was a very short-term contract. But if you see something that's for 5 years or 10 years, these are contracts that typically have longevity and are things that we will procure time and time again. Please keep in mind that a lot of the things in the NAICS the 3.3 NAICS codes, a lot of those for like software licenses, those do tend to be a year, but if you see a bunch of them repeatedly, then that would probably be an advantageous contract for you to pursue. And then we also have the GSA Advantage and eLibrary for a lot of the commercial entities. So now let's get to the big question. Why should you respond to market research inquiries? So FAR 5201C, it states the primary purpose of the notices are to improve small business access to acquisition information and enhance competition by identifying contracting and subcontracting opportunities. So it's twofold, prime and subcontracting opportunities. If you don't respond, you can't distinguish yourself from your competitors. And if you respond accordingly and offer solutions, you can get the person reviewing your capability statement to look at your response a few more times. So this is where I went back to the person who asked the question, like, how much should I put in a source of sought notice? I said, give them just enough, like just dangle the piece of steak in front of them. I'm sorry if you guys are vegans, but I'm just saying, just for, argument's sake, just dangle that piece of steak to get somebody enticed to say, hey, yeah, they really are offering a really good opportunity here. Maybe it gives you the inside track for that contracting officer or that program manager to come back to you to ask and seek clarity and ask clarifying questions. You can also influence the acquisition strategy. Like I was saying earlier, a lot of people don't realize that the market research responses also help identify subcontracting opportunities. And I always have this term, be frenemies with your enemy or a competitor that you know can do the work. And the reason why I say that is if you know your company A, but you know company B can do this work and you have a cordial relationship, try to find other businesses that are similar with you and what you offer that can actually make for good competition, and you increase the likelihood of a set aside. Because for me as an OSDBU person, as I'm looking at these acquisition packages and I'm looking at the responses, I can go back to the contracting officer and say, I'm not going to sign off on your acquisition strategy determination because the companies, like you have these 5 small businesses, they answer the questions, they answer them properly. I'm looking at the IGCE, their pricing looks like it should be in alignment. So I can ask the tough questions on your behalf, but if you're not responding, I can't drill them the way I need to on your behalf. So just remember, the more of you that respond, it gives you all an inside track, and then you influence acquisition strategy. Because at this point, it's all about making sure you get these set asides. So that's how you play a critical role. So I've heard many times, a lot of veteran businesses get excited and get upset when they don't see an SDVOSB set aside. And it's always contingent on the market research results. So many of you all are not responding, unfortunately. And if you don't respond, I can't have that hard conversation with that contracting officer, because at that point, I can't even articulate your capability, especially if I go back and see your response and then I see the criteria that they have set. Another thing too that we do on our side too is when they are issuing a source of sought notice or an RFI, we do let them know if they are being very restrictive and if they're trying to rule out certain small businesses from responding. We have those hard conversations. OSDBU is really not pretty popular with a lot of our contracting folks. We try to have a very collaborative working relationship, but it makes it easier for us to advocate on your behalf if you are responding. And if you are clearly articulating your capability. So one thing I do want you to understand that past performance, make sure that it's within the size, scope, and magnitude of what it is. So if someone is coming out and saying, you know, I need an electrician, don't talk about, you know, you're a plumber if the requirement is for electrician. Even if you have commercial work does count towards your past performance. And we have been letting contracting officers and program managers know that no, someone does not have to do work within the VA for it to be past performance. As long as it's within the same size, scope, and magnitude of the requirement, and if they did it in DoD, I mean, I think DoD and the VA are, you know, pretty in line with each other for some requirements. So at this point, we always make sure that, hey, if the requirement's $10 million and the only performance that you have is $25,000 versus 10 million, I can't make the case that it's of the same size, scope, and magnitude. And so just make sure you're very strategic in responding. So are you responding just to respond, or is it strategic? If you can't do the work, you can't do the work. Don't waste your time and your money and your effort drafting up a response to a source of sought notice, knowing good and well you can't do it. Focus your energies on requirements that you know for a fact that you can articulate your capability and give a good response so you can be considered for the award when the solicitation hits the street. Remember, the point is be strategic in how you respond, align your capability, answer the questions. If a requirement cannot be set aside, subcontracting opportunities are always available, and we review them on the acquisition support team side. We review the percentages, and we'll go back and look at the market research results, and we have the autonomy to go back to the contracting officer to say, hey, you had a lot of service disabled veterans who are also 8A that responded. You might want to increase this 8A percentage. Same thing with HubZone, women owned. We're able to do that. So let's go to our practical example. Wendy, do I have time to answer any questions before I get into the practical example? Because it's pretty detailed.
Yes. So one question is, even though I provided them with the link to the GSA website, can you please define GWAC or contract vehicles?
Yeah, GWAC is a government-wide acquisition contract. So GWACs are technically like IT requirements. So that's your GSA Alliant, 8A Stars. Yeah, I want to say Alliant 8A Stars, NASA Soup, that's a GWAC, NAC IAC, the one for NIH. So GWACs are more IT. When you're talking about the GSA contracts, professional services, you're talking about Oasis, the new Polaris contract that's coming out. That's going to be more of a professional services contract. And any best-in-class contract vehicles, that means that anybody in the federal government can use it. Your strategic sourcing contracts are just agency specific. So that means only those within that federal agency can use that contract. So government wide, strategic sourcing, agency specific.
Do you recommend NASA Soup or is VIP better?
VIP is not a contract vehicle. NASA Soup is a contract vehicle. So I think in your profile in VIP, you can state whether or not you have a NASA Soup contract. And that will also help when you respond to market research inquiries, that you can say you have an NASA Soup contract. And so if a lot of people, then when they respond to the market research inquiry and they all say, hey, we have a NASA Soup contract, that will more than likely help the contracting officer say, hey, we have a lot of people who can, you know, supply this product, this IT product on NASA Soup, and then they can do a set aside on NASA Soup. And that's another thing too. A lot of these GSA contracts and Oasis and Alliant, they have small business pools, and we are able to do specific set asides on those contract vehicles. So that's another point of interest. So we can do set-asides on those contracts as well.
How often does Vector open up for the new CVE verified vendors?
I do not know. That's usually a contract and officer decision when they want to do an on-ramp. I want to say they had an on-ramp about 1.5 years ago. So on average, it's looking like every 2 years. That's what it's looking like, but that's usually the contract and officer who makes that decision. And they should give proper notice ahead of time whether or not they plan on doing some kind of on-ramping.
How do SDBOSBs find out more about Vector?
There should be a business guide on it, or you can just Google the Vector contract and find out what pools they are. I know the ordering guide is put out for the specific contract holders, but any public information, I would say just try to Google it to see what you can find. And you'd be surprised how much information is actually put out there on Google about a lot of these contracts. There should be some public information on it on our OSDBU website. If not, just let me know, and then we'll figure out how to get you some public information.
How do you register on Vector and T4NG?
You can't register. Whenever they do onboarding, that's when you would have to provide a proposal. And typically when they do, they'll do a RFP or not an RFP, I'm sorry, a source of sought notice to identify other firms. And at that point, you have to submit a proposal to be considered as one of the contract holders for Vector or T4NG.
Any information on how VA OIT utilizes the market research after presenting capabilities to the panel?
I have no idea. They do their own thing. And half of their requirements are exempt from review on our end.
Can VA customers buy services direct from GSA Advantage to VIP verified SDBOSBs? And if so, why would we see our primary services released for bid?
Okay, so I guess I need some more clarity. So you mean VA customers in terms of the federal supply schedules that are on GSA? Like I said, with GSA, any of the VA owned federal supply schedules, yes, we can do specific set asides for SDVOSB on those. But in terms of, do we have to force the VA customers to use it? No, we can't force people to use specific contract vehicles. We can highly recommend it. But the benefit right now is the category management push is that it's telling everybody within the federal government, hey, if you have a contract vehicle that something can go on, we rather you use it and control our spend under management as opposed to doing an open market buy. So I'll tell everybody the trajectory and the trend now is to stay focused and stay far away from open market as much as possible. And then if someone has to go open market, they have to have a very good justification as to why they can't use a current existing contract vehicle, whether it's a strategic sourcing vehicle or a GSA schedule. I hope that answers your question.
And okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it back to you because I'm seeing a few questions I can address in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm sorry that this font is kind of small, but this is a practical example of a requirement for laundry services that we had here at the VA. So the contracting officer had the following criteria listed in the source of sought notice for industry to respond to. So they wanted to know the basic stuff, the business name. At this time, we were still using DUNS, your business type. They asked for a price estimate, which is not uncommon for services of this type. So when most COs ask, it's because they need the feedback for price reasonable determination. We also encourage the contracting officers or the program managers to ask for pricing questions because especially now during inflation, things have gone up. So what we thought was a reasonable price before and we didn't factor inflation, we have to take into consideration. So don't be surprised if you start seeing a lot more pricing questions being asked, and we're really encouraging it for a lot of the factors that are going on right now, supply chain issues and so forth. With this requirement, they also ask for the certification type for this industry. Apparently, there's some form of laundry standard certification that they have to have. And depending on what the industry is, asking for a certification or some kind of accreditation is also not uncommon as well. If there are certain standards and certifications, they will state that they need it. And so at any time, market research is the best time to ask. So the CEO is aware and can have a reasonable expectation when it comes time for the quotes and proposals. There were also questions regarding technical capability. So the questions were very much to explain the company's capability to actually perform the laundry services. So that's the background. There was great small business interest in this requirement. So out of all the firms, only 2 firms provided this certification information that was asked by the program office. A common theme that we often see is businesses responding to requirements and then they never speak to their capability, right? So although something might be in the same NAICS category or similar, it doesn't mean you have the past performance to justify it. So for instance, if you could review line 4, this is where the service disabled veteran outlines their capability for janitorial services and never speaks to laundry services. And they also gave a price estimate of 60 cents per pound, right? So if you have a strategic partnership with another company and that company is not a service disabled veteran owned small business, but they have the capability, discuss how both companies plan on performing on the contract together, right? So for example, maybe the veteran company has the logistical measures, right, in place for delivery, and the partner actually has a laundry experience. So speak how both companies will achieve the mission together. So that way the program manager and the contracting officer has a reasonable expectation of your contract performance. So remember, it only says you have to have 51% ownership of the company. And in order to do the work, you can say, I'm the veteran owned company. These are the logistics. You want the laundry delivered to this. Well, guess what? I have a trucking service and my partner does the laundry and they can do the laundry in such and such a bulk. This is just me rambling, guys. So just kind of flow with me. And we can make sure that the laundry gets to each location and this is how we're going to do it. So at that point, it would have made the service disabled veteran more competitive in nature, right? So because of this, the capability for the service disabled veteran-owned small business company, one was disqualified because they just talked about their janitorial services, and this requirement is asking about laundry services. So the other service disabled veteran was line item 7. So they didn't tie their capability to their own company, but kept mentioning their partner, right? So this was a red flag because this looks like it's going to be a pass-through. So the example that I gave you was if you're the service disabled vet company and you want to partner with someone else, you have to speak to both. And when you're doing your capability, you have to show like, okay, my partner can do this, but I as a service disabled vet, this is what I will do on this contract. So if you just keep referring to somebody else and the work that they do, that's the red flag and automatic, okay, this is a pass through and it means that you're not really performing as a true service disabled veteran. And one thing that we don't want to happen is for you to lose your verification status because now you're sitting here and you're pretty much not being truthful and honest about your capability. So in the line item 7, because it didn't tie their capability, they also quoted a price estimate of $2.83 per pound, which did not align with other prices that were quoted. So now we have a situation where you had 2 service disabled veteran-owned firms pretty much disqualified themselves because they didn't answer any of the questions that were being asked during the source to sought. So in this case, the CO decided on a total small business set aside. So now that I explained it and you see everything, do you agree or disagree with that assessment of the contracting officer to make this as a total small business set aside? Feel free to put your answers in the chat. So now this was a requirement that I reviewed, and I agreed with the contracting officer's determination to make this a total small business set aside. And the reason being is because neither service disabled vet spoke to their capability. Then we couldn't meet the FAR determination of 2 or more capable SDV OSBs, because now you're looking at the price difference. One came in at 60 cents a pound, and then the other one came in at $2.83 a pound. So now I can't even determine fair market price because of the delta between both prices, right? And then furthermore, we could not justify the service disabled vet set aside because we didn't have 2 or more capable firms to offer the service, period. So these are the considerations that we take into account with a source of thought and when we do the review. So I want you all to consider pricing as essential. If something changes in industry that causes your prices to hike, like I was talking about with inflation, let the government know so we can have realistic expectations. This was done like about 2 years ago, so inflation wasn't even a factor. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that the first company came in because of inflation. Now the prices say 75 cents a pound, and the second one came in at 80 cents a pound, and the third one came in at 81 cents a pound. And then the service disabled vet came in relatively in alignment with that, and then everyone is saying the same thing because of inflation, the price of everything went up, then we will adjust our IGCER on our side to say, hey, we're not taking into consideration inflation. So the way you answer the questions matter. Stick to what you are capable of. If you have a partner, articulate how the team will perform. Pay attention to any certifications asked about. Pricing is key. Do not charge price premiums. So do what is necessary to ensure you are pricing fairly, that to the point that you have reasonable profit. So I can't justify paying, what was it, $2.83 a pound when other pricing came in at 55 cents a pound and 42 cents a pound and 48 cents a pound. We just can't do it. We have to continue to be good stewards. And I can't stress enough, never, ever, ever charge a price premium. Charge what's reasonable to the point that you still have a comfortable profit. And just keep in mind that we do have to be good stewards over all our money because we're all taxpayers at the end of the day. So how do you get the information? So we do have our VetBiz portal where you can go in. I don't think we have time to do a demo. We're running short. But on our website, we do have our small business liaisons in the field, so you can contact them directly. We also have all the other VA organizations in that profile as well. So we also have a small business liaison for the National Cemetery Administration listed, the Veterans Business Administration, Benefits Administration, the Veterans Health Administration. So everybody is listed there. So you should be able to get to the field offices if need be. So your small business liaison in the field is your best point of contact. So hopefully today, in summary, that I was able to help you come to understand why the question, did you do your homework, is asked. And I hope I was able to help you all truly understand that. I hope you have a better understanding of market research and how the VA does it and the different market research mechanisms that we have. I hope I was able to hammer home the critical role you play. I cannot stress that enough. You have to respond. You have to respond. And I apologize we didn't have time to go through the demo of VetBiz portal. I know it's undergoing a few changes. So hopefully the next time we do this, we will be able to, the changes will already be made and we can be able to demo some of the things and the resources that you can find on the VetBiz portal. And so I want to say the next few slides are just a bunch of resources. And Wendy, I guess I can kick it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Liz. This has been a lot of good information.
Are there any other questions that I can answer before?
Yes, a few of them. There we go. I was looking for the camera. So a few of the questions that we did receive were either pertaining to some trainings that we have already conducted where we've been directing them. The question about Vector, I did see that VA on VA Osbs website, they did do a town hall. So I actually posted that information in the chat for anybody else that was looking for that. But the individual that asked the question in the Q&A, I sent that over to you as well. For any questions that we aren't able to get to, I'm still going to cover a few within the next 5 minutes, but that we're not able to get to, please know I'll be reaching back out to you within the next 2 days so I can make sure I get a response back to you. So I am only looking at the chat for the questions. I'm going to go back up because there were two. One of them said, where are good places to do market research if you offer a service and not a product?
Yeah, most services are GSA e-buy. So you will find a lot of or like, sources sought notices issued on GSA e-buy for services. And then we also have ability, the certain services that we can get on Ability One and also through Unicore. So your best bet is to become familiar with the sites that have a lot of the services or products. Like for instance, Ability One, there's a list on their website that it goes from janitorial services to furniture. Same thing with Unicore. Furniture has to be bought through Unicore or GSA. So it just depends because they tend to try to split those requirements. So just become familiar. Again, Google can be your friend. So just Google what specific entities use what services. That way you can strategically focus on those contract vehicles. And then work with GSA if you don't have a GSA schedule. I don't know their process. I know their process is very difficult, but their OSDBU office should be able to help you navigate that process because I know it's a rigorous process and it's kind of expensive. So it has to be a business decision for you to make if you determine a GSA schedule to get on those kind of products would be beneficial for you.
Do you know what the percentage of RFPs released need to be on contract-specific contracts?
There's no percentage. It's just that if it meets the requirements in FAR Part 5, then it has to be posted on SAM.gov. But technically, SAM.gov, anything over $25,000 in FAR Part 5, it does state that that's the government point of entry for everything. So anything less than that, if they've determined that it's GSA, that it can go on a GSA schedule, then it's GSA e-buy.
Other than sources sought and RFIs, are there any other criteria the contracting entity can utilize to determine set-aside projects?
Yeah, so they don't have to do a source of sought. I had in a couple of slides before that, I showed you all the market research mechanisms. If they host an industry day and that's enough for them to say, hey, we got enough feedback from our industry day that we can do this kind of set aside, they can do that. I always tell people it doesn't matter what market research mechanism that you use, as long as you advertise what it is that you're trying to do to get to that information and you get the information that you need from industry, you can use it. So there were instances where we did a source of sought when I was working in DoD, and then we did an industry day, and then from there we were able to say, okay, we can do a set aside or we can't. There were some that we just went straight to the industry day, and based on that feedback, then we were able to say, hey, we got enough information from the industry day, we can just automatically issue an RFP. So it just depends on whatever the contracting officer decides to use with the program, and if they get enough information, then they can carry on.
What is the difference between size and magnitude?
I have never heard of magnitude, but I know STARS is an 8A specific IT contract on GSA. I've never heard of magnitude, so I guess I have to see what that's about.
Okay. It looks like some of these that the rest of these questions SOC will be able to answer afterwards. So I want to thank you, Liz, for joining us and conducting this training. Everyone, this training is part of the Vet Talk Procurement Readiness Series, which Liz and the rest of the acquisition support team has, introduced to the small business community. And so a part of this, a part of the Vet Talk Procurement Readiness Series, we have conducted podcasts with Dr. Linda Williams. We've also hosted preparation needed for doing business with the Department of Veteran Affairs with our small business liaisons. A lot of these questions were asking about the small business liaisons. We actually host those trainings with them, as well as the Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. So I'm going to go ahead and close out. On this slide, you see Join Us. We have a training tomorrow, a part of our Diversifying Your Portfolio series, doing business with General Dynamics. Doing business with General Dynamics. So if you want to attend, I recommend that you register for this event. Don't forget about the survey at the end to let us know how we're doing, because this is how we build and develop these trainings. So thank you, and everyone have a good rest of your evening.